Okay, let's get the ball moving or rolling. Okay, let's remove the debug logs for now. All right, and to get the ball moving, I'm gonna need to use the speed variable. So public float. Let's call this ball speed. And then I'm going to need to get the inputs from the player themselves. So I'm going to need to get the horizontal and vertical input. Let me just explain them for you real quick. So since I'm getting, yeah, it is. Since I'm using WASD, so W, A, and then S, and then D, I believe it's obvious that this is going to be for X and this is going to be for Y, right? So this is going to be X and this is going to be Y, all right? But the ball is in 3D, right? The ball itself is moving on three axes, not left, right, and up and down alone. It's not a 2D game after all, it's a 3D game, right? So we're going to need to configure this input to move it in X, all right, and Z. All right, we're going to translate the X and Y to X and Z. All right, because we have 3D axes over here. We've got X, Z, and Y. Remember? Simply going back to Unity, this basically explains itself. I've got this in the Z axis, as you can see right here, Z, and then I've got X right here, then I've got Y. I don't want the input to be in X and Y. I want it to be in X and Z. And perhaps later on we can do the jump function, all right, which would allow us to make the ball jump. All right. So for now, I've got the X and Y axes that would be taken from whatever, a controller or the keyboard, okay? And then I need to translate the X to X, all right? X to X, and Y to Z. Okay, so let's do that. So I've got the ball speed, and then let me get the inputs themselves. No, this doesn't need to be public. Why do I want to make the ball speed public? Let me just save that and then head over to the script. As you can see, going into the ball game object, you can simply change the ball speed by changing the number right here. This allows you to change these variables from the inspector itself. All right, let's get going with the variables. All right, so next up, I'm going to create the floats for the horizontal movement, and then float for vertical movement. Let me expand the window. I'm also going to need to reference the rigid body component in the ball itself. Right, that's great. Just reference it for me. At the beginning of the game, wow, okay, it's already helping me out. At the beginning of the game, I'm going to need to get the component itself from the game object that the script is resting upon. So since I already put the script here, all right, on the ball, that means it's going to try to get a reference from the rigid body. I'm going to tell you why. Because this has to do with physics, right? I'm simulating physics here. And if I want to move the ball itself, I'm going to have to influence physics within Unity to push the ball, all right, in whichever direction that I want it to be pushed to. So in this case, I'm referencing the rigid body, and then in the update function, I need to get the input, all right, get the X and Y coordinates, the horizontal movement and vertical movement, translate these to the 3D vector, all right, this is called a vector 3, all right, which is X, Y, Z, translate it to be X and Z, and then apply that translation to the rigid body itself, all right. So let's create a new method, call it move ball, so void move ball. And the purpose of move ball is going to be first mentioned right here, move ball, there it is. The purpose of move ball is for it to get the horizontal movement and vertical movement. Now, the way that I'm doing the input system within this tutorial, I'm utilizing the old input system. Mind you, there is a new input system that Unity uses also for the tutorial itself, but in my case, because I simply got used to the old input system, it's a lot easier for me and people who just got into Unity to understand. That's why I'm gonna use it in this tutorial. So you've got the input system, the new input system right here. I'm not gonna install it. I'm simply gonna rely on the old input system. Right. So within the method itself, move ball, I'm gonna get the horizontal movement. All right. Equals get axes. All right. And I simply type horizontal. Sorry, it's input dot get axes. Yes. And then vertical input. Did I call it? Yeah, vertical movement. Call it vertical input, but let me just do that. Input dot get axes. And then here, vertical. All right. This brings us into a cool feature here. I can double click on a variable, Control R on your keyboard, and then I can rename it to whatever I want. I want to rename this to horizontal input. All right. I'm going to rename this to vertical input. Okay. Right. Cool. So next up, I'm going to use these variables to add them to basically translate them to the vector3 component, as I mentioned, and then translate them to the physics system. Okay, so I'm already getting the inputs from the player at this point. I've already initialized these or declared these variables. I'm basically saying here that get the input from the player for the horizontal movement, which can be AD, all right, and the vertical movement, which can be WS, all right, and this gets them all the time, all right? This gets them all the time. Why? Because it was played in the update method. So next up, I need to use these. How? I'm going to simply initialize the vector3 movement, which is going to say, yeah, new vector3, and then, yep, there you go. Horizontal input, and then 0, 0, and then vertical input. All right. Of course, we're going to have to test this to make sure that it's working fine, but so far this should work. Because I'm getting the movement itself, I'm saying that movement, the movement of the ball, is going to be comprised of x, y, z. Now, y is 0 because we don't want to influence y to begin with. We want to just influence the ball, all right, to move in x and z coordinates. We don't want to influence this axis. That's why we're simply setting these two parameters, all right, while keeping this as 0. Now, next up, I need to add the movement to I need to simulate the physics within the game by doing the following. Rigid body dot velocity is going to equal, or sorry, it can be at force. Yeah, at force, which is going to be movement multiplied by speed. Where is it? Ball speed. There it is. All right. What I'm saying right here is that please take the ball, get me the movement coordinates based on the input that I have already put, all right, through the keyboard or the joystick that I have, and multiply it by speed. Okay? So I make sure that I've saved the script. Now, when I run the game, the ball's going to fall down. All right? And now I can actually move the ball. If the ball is not moving for you, that means that the speed variable has not been set. That it's 0. And if it's 0, I cannot influence it. As you can see, if I set this to 0, get back and play the game, I cannot move the ball. As long as I put a speed here that I can multiply it with the movement, then I can actually move the ball. Awesome. So we've got movement. Let's get back to the script. I've got movement. The ball is working fine. Okay, let's just make sure that everything is clean. Let's save. Now we can get back right here. All right, so now let's set up the level design of the game, all right, to have 4 walls and basically a cube for you to collide with and then collect as a score. I'm gonna pause the video right here, finish the level design, and then, of course, get back to you in a bit.